مساء الخير على حضراتكم. Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy and honored. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be participating in this great conference. It's a great opportunity to talk about architecture, and talk about architecture and urban history. And it's my pleasure today to talk about as usual maybe, to talk about the case of Alexandria, about the architectural and urban history of the city of Alexandria. When I was first generously invited by the organizers of the conference to talk about something that is related to mosques and churches, my very first response is to talk about the case of St. Mark's Church in Alexandria. Why? Because of its very specific nature, architecturally speaking. Since then, I've been trying to find a way to talk about how this very interesting building and how it is actually like a palimpsest that carries marks and symbols and that can be used as a way to talk about the city itself and about its history, about its traumas throughout history. So let's first start with a very short tale about my relationship to this building. I was born and brought up in Manshia in downtown Alexandria, and for me the building has always been a mystery. Because as you can see from this image, it has always been hidden behind these trees all the time. It is very hard to really understand the building as a whole because it's always covered behind this screen of trees. And when I tried as a young architect to find as much as possible to find evidences and to find more about this building, what was available at that time was very small, very limited. So even from postcards, it has always been a mystery. It has always been covered and hidden, as you can see from these photos. So even in a very nice and interesting book about Alexandria, written by Michael Hyde, who I'm going to mention again today, this is the only portion of the building that he could take a photo of in his very interesting guidebook about the city. So even when the first time I owned a digital camera, it was like 23 years ago or something, one of the first tasks was to jump on top of the surrounding buildings of the St. Mark's building to take a shot or to peek on this building and understand how it is really designed and how its details, and because I wasn't sure if I'm welcomed or not. And currently, to be honest, I'm very much welcomed by the generous people in the church. So my first time to understand the building and to know about its history was when I owned this book, Empire Building by Mark Crenson. The architectural historian Crenson is a very important writer who researched a lot about architecture and memory and about Victorian architecture and 19th and 20th century architecture. He wrote a whole chapter about the church in this book. And it was my first time actually to see how different this building is from the drawings, and I'm not going to show all the drawings now because I need to talk about it later. But for me, this was a big surprise, a big gift to know more about the building. So I'm just going to tell the story now in a chronological way as a story, starting from Muhammad Ali. And because he was very much responsible, or the very main reason about this building and how it looks like today. So this is Muhammad Ali, and we all know how important he was for the history of modern Egypt and for Alexandria especially, and how he transformed the city in a few years from a very small hamlet of like 5,000 or 6,000 residents into a huge city, a huge port, with his policies and how he managed to invite and to attract people from all over the Mediterranean to come and live here together in this city. And one of his main important decisions was to allow different ethnicities and different communities in the city to build their own buildings of worship, architecture of worship. So he allowed the Christians to build their churches from different kinds of Christian sects and Christian groups. So he gave lands for the Catholics, mainly the French Catholics, and also to the Coptic, the Orthodox of both Greek Orthodox and also the Armenians. He gave pieces of land to all of these groups to have freedom to build their own places of worship. So first the French came, actually being like the main protectors of Catholicism in the Ottoman Empire. And then the British came and they tried to ask for a place to build our place, to have a place as a church in the city. And he was resisting all the time. He said that the Ottoman Sultan wouldn't, the High Court wouldn't allow this to happen, and he kept postponing this step for a long time. This is Alexandria by the time of the French campaign, and this is a map from the Description de l'Égypte, and this is how Muhammad Ali started his mission in Alexandria. And this is Muhammad Ali, and this is his current. In this image, he's sitting in cross-legged in the Diwan in Ras al-Tin Palace, and we can actually see behind him the Egyptian fleet when he's actually receiving the British consul in Alexandria. We have here Colonel Patrick Campbell, who was actually a friend of Muhammad Ali, and he's here talking to him, but it is also Campbell who was the one who tried for a long time to have this place as to have a church in the city of Alexandria. So this is a drawing by David Roberts, and David Roberts actually sitting beside Campbell in this etching, in this drawing. And he suddenly, in a farewell event, he suddenly decided to give the British a gift on the day of almost the last week when Campbell was about to leave and return back to the United Kingdom. He suddenly, in this event, he gave the British the right, and he gave them a piece of land in a very prominent place on the Midan al-Mujayya or Midan al-Qanasil, or the consuls plus the consul. And it was a very small piece of land, but it was enough. And here we can see a map of Alexandria at that time, of maybe in the 1830s, with we can see two places. The yellow one, I think I have a pointer maybe. Okay. So here we can see the palace where Campbell and Muhammad Ali were having their conference, and this drawing. And on the other side of the city, we can see also the place where he gave the British the right to have their place of worship. Before his departure, the colonel transferred the land to the prominent British community, and they had the land, but they didn't have enough money to start building the church on time. And this is why, it's a long story, that they spent like 13 or 14 years to finish this building actually. Muhammad Ali had two conditions to give this land to the British. The first condition is that, okay, you can have it and you can build whatever you want, but just on the condition that I don't know what you're going to build. So if you build a church, it's not my problem. And the second condition is that he asked them to build the building in a way, in a style that goes in harmony with the rest of the city. It has to be not to be an alien in the city of Alexandria. At that time, the city of Alexandria was very small. It is this part that we can see, the white part. It was here represented as a solid part. Yeah. So this, what appears to be one piece, this is actually the dense fabric of the city of Alexandria. So in this map, because it's basically a maritime map, they decided to represent or to present the city as a dense body without any streets or anything. And they just only showed the Place d'Armes or the Place del Consul in this space. So the city, how it looked at that time, it was an Arabic city and Islamic city. As we can see here also from the description of Egypt, it had this dense vernacular fabric, as you can see, with houses and mosques. And this is what the kind of religious architecture in Alexandria at that time. This is an example. This is the Terbana Mosque in Alexandria, still existing. And this is how this architecture looked like at that time. It was very distinctive, having this red and black bricks on the portals. And this is like a cross section in this building, the Terbana Mosque, which was actually, it used some spoiler from older buildings. So here we can find some historical columns recycled and reused in this building. So this is, in a very quick glance, how the city of Alexandria looked like at that time. But the first problem that happened before starting the construction of the church was the big conflict of the 1840s, which is called the Oriental Crisis, when with the high expectations and high hopes of Muhammad Ali extending his powers to the Levant and to Syria and so on, he had a very big conflict with the Ottoman Empire and also with the British, who actually almost destroyed all his fleet and all his hopes as well. So it wasn't, of course, logical to give them the right to start building the church while they are destroying his fleet and ending his hopes at that time. So the project was frozen, diplomatically frozen for a long time. For the first selection for an architect to start working on this project was done by the British community in the city, and they chose an architect named Anthony Sullivan, and he was a prominent architect working in the UK at that time. And his buildings most of them are Gothic and very typical religious Gothic buildings. And he created a proposal for the church in Alexandria. Unfortunately, all the archive of this architect has disappeared, so we don't have a very good idea what exactly did he propose. But the problem is that there wasn't enough money, and the political environment wasn't allowing him to start working. So the project kept being postponed for a while, until actually they decided, the community in here in Alexandria, the British community, they decided to stop this project. They decided not to hire or to construct this proposal, basically because of some concerns about how it really goes in harmony with the architecture of the city, as Muhammad Ali, the Wali, asked, and also they had also some concerns about the environmental aspect of the building, because the building was completely solid, and they thought that this is not suitable for the weather in Egypt. So the project kept aside for like 4 years, but I'm going to jump to Europe at the end of the 1830s, just to talk about some roots of why this building has evolved in the way it is. Back in the 1830s, there was several trials and several symbols of how the West, or how Europe was interested in the Orient, in the East, and how the Arabic or Islamic arts has attracted them at that time. These are some examples of the books and publications that were published at that time that tried to cover for the first time, maybe, or to document the architecture of the Islamic communities all over the Arab world and beyond. And one of these books was actually written by the brother-in-law of the architect of the church. Back in Egypt, this is a very interesting watercolor in 1842 on top of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It shows the whole expedition of Lepsius, the great Egyptologist. They are taking like a group photo on top of the pyramid. And one of the main members of this group, this is Karl Lepsius himself, and with him was a group of architects and draftsmen who came basically for the task of documenting the architecture of Egypt. And one of them was actually our man, the architect of the Church of St. Maurice. This is the architect James Wilde. James Wilde came to Egypt in 1842 as a draftsman, but actually he was a well-established architect back in the United Kingdom. This is actually the only image or presentation of Wilde that we have until now. And this is a church that he built in Streatham in the UK just before coming to Egypt. So this is the kind of architecture that he was interested in. And I can say that it is also an interesting building because it combines styles and details. And this is a typical Islamic feature. And we have medallions. The medallions in the first scheme of Wilde, they weren't used extensively as they were later on used in the final building, in the final design. So this is our building's entrance, and this is Sultan Dahir papers. So I'm just trying to compare them here. The exact use of the medallions and the arch and the gold and so on. So, and this is not actually a very my postulation or my kind of suggestion, because when I was browsing the archive of Wilde in the Victoria and Albert Museum, I found detailed drawings of the entrance, both entrances of Dahir Beber's mosque, whether the northeast or the west-east entrance. So he already was fascinated by this building, and he tried to, not to copy it, but to get inspired from it, as you can see. The crenellations are also a very interesting feature in the building, and we can compare here the drawings to the final design. building today. We can find inside the crenellations we have a cross, a very obvious cross. So they are very special crenellations, actually. And also another feature that I believe maybe one of the most interesting features in the design is the writing itself, how he used, because this wasn't a feature in churches before. So this kind of writings or engravings, writing text on the facades of the building, this wasn't common at all in any kind of churches actually. So this comes directly from the religious architecture in Cairo. And he even used like a very special font to create this epigraphy on the building. So the epigraphy of the building is very special and it's very hard to be read because of the trees that surround the building as well. So I tried my best to read the epigraphy, to read what is written, and it is from one of the Mazmur, one of the Mazamir, one of the Psalms, yes, exactly. So this is the main elevation on Manshaya Square, and we have also another psalm, or inspired from the psalm, again, on the back of the building. It says, enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. This is a direct quote. I think this was also a very sensitive decision from Wilde to choose this kind of familiar feature in his church. And when he chose also the psalms or the writings or the inscriptions, he chose some that are also sort of familiar with the kind of epigraphy on mosques in Cairo. So we have Tasabih and we have Karim. So we have a day and Dawam, a day. We have, I mean, like different, very common meanings behind the chosen epigraphy scriptures. Speaking about the interior as well is very interesting to look at. Again, we have a lot of inspirations from buildings in Cairo. So this is the church, and we can also distinguish some Arab and Islamic features, whether it's this horseshoe arch and all the roof itself. So I'm sorry?
Inverted recesses itself.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Exactly, the vertical recesses. This is the Qaitbay, Sultan Qaitbay Mosque and Talat al-Kabsh in Cairo. And this is the arch, and this is the fenestration, the qamariyat, these kind of windows that are ornamented with gypsum and colorful glass, stained glass. So this is Qaitbay's Mamluk, the wonderful mosque of Qaitbay. And this is Wilde, a sketch of this wonderful piece of architecture. And this is his interpretation of the same composition inside the church of St. Louis. So we have very similar elements, as you can see. Years later, actually in 1872, okay, but this is just like a part of very quick, because I don't want to take much time of the interior, but let's talk about some other features quickly. In 1872, Wilde sent one of his colleagues to add some additions to the building of St. Louis. So we have here Castor Burden Clark. He was the architect and artist responsible for the addition of some new parts inside the church itself. This is Clark, and he was the one, the artist behind the murals and the paintings and murals inside the church. As for example, here we have this triptych of the crossing and sorry, I have a problem here. Okay. So here, these traditions were much more or much less inspired by, or it's like a typical kind of Christian art inside the church. And so we have here the triptych with the four evangelists, and below it we have the illustrations of the Passion, the symbols of the Passion illustrated, as you can see. Also, another addition was to have these murals of three important saints. Saint Anthony, who is the founder of monasticism, and Saint Athanasius, of course, the famous Saint Athanasius, and Origen also as well represented in this three murals. At that time also, in the 1870s, Wilde commissioned in London to create Qamariyat, stucco windows, to be installed in the church and to replace some existing windows at that time. So this is his proposals, and this is what is built. So we call this kind of art with gypsum, we call it Qamariyat. We don't have any other translation. So this is also special because this comes again from Cairan examples, but then inside we have stained glass representations of the four evangelists. So we have again a creative way of dealing with these Christian symbols inside the church. This is the apse as it is today. We can find the 5 Qamariyat as you can see. So we have the Savior and we have the 4 evangelists, 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. The roof, it's a very fine piece of architecture as well. And it also, it's basically designed on precedents in Qaibeh, in Barkuk, and other very important Islamic monuments. These are very new photographs shot last week. And we have an organ, a very interesting piece of art as well. A very interesting organ. I'm not sure if it is still working or not, but of course it's worth restoration. The organ was installed in the 1880s. Okay, so this is the church, and we have a very small side story about the building that was built beside it. It is also called the St. Mark's building, and sometimes it's called Okel St. Mark, but the most common name is St. Mark's buildings. This is another building, and it was constructed by a special association in Alexandria, and it's called the St. Mark's Building Association. And it was planned to have a place for the British consulate inside it. And actually, in 1869, James Watt again came, and at least he didn't came, but he again he proposed a design for this building. So his first building is here to the left, and he proposed this design for the new St. Mark's building to the right of it. And unfortunately, this was not built because of many, also again, financial problems. And the building that was built eventually was this building, St. Mark's building that we have today. Still, we have it in Manchester. It was built by a French architect, not very well known, Alphonse Hoyen, architect. And I find it very interesting that while when he proposed this design, he didn't try to replicate himself or to make a building that goes very close to the details of his original building. But when the French architect took the mission, he took the motif or the repetitive part of the horseshoe arches, and he designed the building using this very special unit. And this is also again the building in Manchester. This is the entrance. It was a very nice entrance, with forged iron and symbols of St. Mark and so on. And unfortunately, this doesn't exist anymore. And at least on this side, because it does exist another copy on the other side. So this is the St. Mark building, and this is the building today. We still can find it. And this is the back entrance of the Ocal or the St. Mark's building. And we have also here again the symbol of St. Mark, the lion. And keeping also again, the architect tried to, as much as possible, to refer to the church with this like symbolic medallions or and these ornaments, but it is much more abstract actually. But it is an interesting building. I'll get back to this painting again, just to make a comparison. So again, here we are on top of the pyramid, and we now know that this is Wilde, the British architect. But the one standing beside him is another architect, but this is a German architect. His name is Erkan. I hope that I'm pronouncing right. Gustav Erbakan. He's also an architect, and he joined the expedition of Lepsius. And he also built another church in Alexandria. But I'm mentioning this to make this comparison. This is the church that the German architect, and it still exists. Of course, I'm not sure you know it in Manchaya, behind Bolgolot, behind Senghor building. So it is an interesting building, of course, but it is like a typical church with a typical layout, a typical tower, bell tower, and this is actually why I find the St. Mark's building very special, because it is a specially designed building. It didn't just give a very quick answer to the problem. It is an endeavor. It is a drive to find new architecture, new language by this kind of eclectic architecture. Okay, so the building is finished and everyone is happy. Alexandria expands and expands and expands. And if you remember, the church was, at the time of its construction, it was right on the shoreline of the Eastern Harbor. So all these parts came afterwards by reclaiming parts of the sea and by constructing the corniche that we all know. So the church kept even more and more unobserved in a way or other. So this is the church. In all drawings and all photographs, it is always hidden behind the trees. I'm just showing a couple of photographs. This is Manshaya Square before 1882. And let's talk about 1882. The horrible accidents of 1882, the barbaric bombardment of the city, and the events that took place afterwards, the violence, the fires, and only 2 buildings survived from this huge fire and huge bombardment. The buildings are maybe you already know, the Bourse or the Tusidza Palace, the Stock Exchange, and on our church, the St. Mark's building that we're talking about. It is again hidden here behind the debris. And this was the trial of the Arabis, and the church is just outside the cap here. So this is a famous map of the buildings that were burned down and devastated by the bombardment and the fires, and only the church and the courthouse or the Tusidza Palace is the ones that survived from this horrible events. And this is later on when the debris was removed, and this is our church, and this is Muhammad Ali. Again, also Muhammad Ali statue survived from this destruction. And we can see here the St. Mark's building, and again another building behind it. The whole square was built in a very short interval of time, and the church kept its position and its location in this square, in this discreet or this calm, this hidden location behind the trees. The British, with the expansion of the city, the British community built actually another Anglican church in Stanley, the All Saints Church. It's an interesting building, of course, but again, compare it with the creativity of Wilde who tried to create something new at his time. So, this is an interesting photograph of the St. Mark's Church, and it is interesting because for me it was very interesting because of this statue. My friend Mahmoud and myself, we had an exhibition in 2021 about Alexandria 1921, we called it, and it was basically about E.M. Forster and how he saw the city at that time. And E.M. Forster, the British novelist, the famous novelist, he wrote, when he was describing the building, he didn't like it that much, but when he was describing the building, he said that on the left, partially obscured by the trees again, we can see what he called the funny little bust of Major General William Byrd. At the time of the exhibition, I didn't have this photograph, and I was wondering what exactly did Forster see. And I came by this photograph by chance after the exhibition. So this is the funny little bust of Major General William Byrd. He died in Khartoum, and they installed this monument for him. Early, Major General William Byrd. For me, this was a surprise to finally see this statue in place. So there is a very small story, interesting story here, because also Michael Hack that I mentioned a little while ago, he also was looking for this statue. And he was asking the church guys, where is the statue of General Byrd? And when he was speaking to the church the people of the church, nobody really know about this statue. But the gardener of the church, actually remembered suddenly that his father told him that back in 1965, during the Suez crisis, العدوان الثلاثي, the church was afraid that the funny bust of John O'Byrne might be vandalized during the events at that time, because people were very angry, of course, with this aggression again. So they decided to remove the statue and to bury it in the garden of the church. And everyone completely forgot about the church, about the statue, until Michael Hag, the late Michael Hag is this guy, until Michael Hag remembered it and they excavated and they got it out. Actually, no one knows now today where this statue is. Hopefully we can find it. Yeah. So the church kept witnessing events in the square, the Manchia Square, with its changes and lots and lots of changes that took place, but it kept as it is as an anchor that connected it to the memory, to the past of the square. We have it as a backdrop for different activities that took place in Manchia Square throughout time. The building still exists, still intact, but of course it really needs to be restored. It really needs to be at least to have some kind of restoration that is authentic and that keeps the ideas and symbols of James White intact. The church changed name 3 times throughout history, and it is currently managed by Egyptians, not by British, and they are really great people. They open the church for everyone. It's not an introvert church. It is open for everyone to go inside, to take photographs. I usually take my students to talk about the building and talk about how much important it is, because it is the oldest in the square, and how this long story took place in this part of the city center. Everything here has a story. Even this tree actually has a story, because people there say that it was bombarded by the Nazis in the Second World War, so it is currently held in place by support. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but of course Manchia Square was actually bombarded in the Second World War. Thank you. I'll be very happy if you have any questions. Please feel free to ask in Arabic or in English. اسألوا العربي بالإنجليزي. أو يعني أهمني أوي أسمع.
Very much, Ahmed, for this very interesting talk, and I think it really starts really well the conference and right on the theme. I just will start with one question. One question is that you have a lot of data on the building, which is not the case for many other buildings in Alexandria. Did your work on the archives of Wilde was really the main subject and helped you to bring other data, or you add data before to have the Wilde archives?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so is the Wilde archive that you find really set you the work on that, or did you really gather a lot of data before to have access to that?
Okay, the photographs, the postcards, the maps I had them before, but I really found a great wealth of information and drawings in the archive that is kept by the Victoria and Albert Museum. So this is, but I made this especially for our today. So mainly the drawings are new, based on this very well-kept archive of wine at the museum. And it's basically available for everyone to browse online on their website.
Okay, very good. It's give us maybe a chance to pass by when we make our tour.
Thank you, Dr. Sorry for your very informative lecture. My question, you told us that the architect intended here to mix the Islamic and the Christian symbols in the design. But I went there hundreds of times in this church. I noticed on the outer wall there is a symbol of Star of David. Was it for Judaism or an old Islamic symbol?
Well, this is a tricky question. This is not hard to answer. What we call the hexagram or the Star of David is an ancient symbol that you can find in Islam and even in earlier civilizations. And it wasn't assigned to. It started to be used as a Jewish symbol maybe in the 16th century or 17th century, something like that. And it wasn't adopted by Zionists until the late 19th century. So even after this building was built by years. My point of view is, because actually Wilde also used this hexagram again in the earlier project in UK. So it's not his first time to use it. But we can have like at least 2 or 3 theories here, or suggestions. Either it is being used as basically as a geometrical symbol, and this is possible because Owen, the brother-in-law of James Wilde, he is the famous writer of a very famous book. It's called The Grammar of Ornament. And in the Grammar of Ornament, actually the chapter that was about Arabian ornaments in the Grammar of Ornament was drawn by James Wilde. The Grammar of Ornament doesn't at all speak about hidden symbols or past meanings. It basically talks about geometry and about cosmic geometries. But this is a theory. Another one that maybe we have the cross and the hexagram together repetitively used, and then with its layers and religions coming together. So this is another interpretation. And I can think of also another one. After all, this was designed and built for the church, for the community, the Protestant community in Alexandria. So it is somehow, it refers to the Old and the New Testaments together, coming together. This might make more sense for me, but of course it has nothing to do with the current meaning of such a symbol. You're welcome.
Sabine?
Well, thank you. This was a very, very exciting example of this debate between local architecture and eclectic private architecture and all the historical prototypes, models that have been used. With this trend, Alexandria ties to a European trend, no? Because this was in so many countries a big debate, then followed by St. Peter by Viollet-le-Duc, by Ruskin, and so on, that they read the authentic roots of architecture and how one can keep the old traditions and how one can combine it with something new. So I suppose that Alexandria was not the only place in Egypt where such a discussion took place, and later became a part of a theory, like in other countries. And I have also a first question. I wonder whether Wilde did not study also Renaissance architecture. architecture. He mentioned Verona, but this was not so I don't know if he made a trip to Verona, because the lateral facades are very, very funny interpretation of the lateral facades of Alberti's church of Tempio Malatestiano in Rimini. Yes, the first
What is its
building,
name? I'm sorry.
Rimini, you know, it's the south of
Okay.
Venice, and this is called Temple Malatestiano.
Okay.
Malatestiano was a big signor of Rimini, and that's very funny because it has the same succession of arches on very big pillars, and the medallions between the arches. And this church, again, it was the first church of the Renaissance as a whole organism of a building. So there was an existing building, but then there is a facade, and there is a lateral facade. And architects of this time were very interested in this church. We have a lot of surveys of this building in Rimini. So I wonder whether Wilde could not perhaps have studied also this building.
Actually, I'm not sure, but of course, architects at that time, part of their education was to have this grand tour in Europe to learn basically from Italy and other cities all over Europe. So maybe, yes, but I don't really have an answer. I'm not familiar with the building. For me, this is very interesting to find out if possible. But he traveled. He traveled also to Syria after staying in Egypt for a while. So of course he was traveling a lot. But for some reasons, after turning back to London, he didn't design much more buildings, and his biography almost ends at a certain point after the exhibition that he took. I don't know why. There is not a lot of information that are available about his late life, especially. But this is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can't have a better start to our conference, really, linking the theme of the conference, so mosques and church together, and also the city. So thank you very much. This was very inspiring. I'm just curious about the tower, because you said in the beginning that, not in the beginning, but in the before explaining that the tower was not in the end built. And then you mentioned that there is a part that was built. I'm just curious what happened. So at first they decided not to for money?
Yeah, financial reasons.
Ah, okay, not for aesthetic or...
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again for this interesting lecture, and as they mentioned, it's a great start for the conference, combining or highlighting the merge between the two disciplines. I'm really interested in the archive of Wilde that you mentioned, because it reflects or it sheds light on another architect who is Mario Rossi, who also studied Islamic architecture and was very much influenced with the ornaments that he studied and the elements and the motifs, and he repeatedly used them in his buildings. So I wonder if Wilde had other buildings in Egypt or in Syria, or in which he used the same elements, and I wonder also if he mentioned any interpretation or reflections or thoughts in his archive, or they were just drawings, just to understand how he was thinking, what really he admired, what are the most attractive elements for him in his point of view, more details about how he saw the Islamic architecture. Thank you.
Of course, Mario Rossi has much more rich works, a number of mosques and a number of much larger number of buildings. I have to mention that I think that there is a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Omnia Abdelbar. I think she's currently doing some research about Wilde himself and his relation to the Islamic heritage of Cairo. I think so because she was here like a month ago, and she is currently working in the Victoria and Albert Museum. She's in a direct contact with the archive of Wilde. As far as I know, he proposed like a couple of very small projects in Egypt, like a gate to a cemetery, a British cemetery in Cairo, something like that. That also contains some Sharia works, but not as extensive and full detailed as this case. He was interested in the life of Fallah, the peasants and farmers of Egypt, and his being in contact with Edward William Lane and maybe with the Saint-Simonians in Egypt at that time. He was interested in the life of the peasants and the life of Al-Hin, and he drew some of them and he documented, but he does not have a book or a seminar, a work that contains his ideas. He was a practitioner after all. So so this is it. The case of Mari Rossi is much more rich and versatile, and we have like years and years between the both of them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a simple question. On the other side of Salman, there is the Ottoman Bank, which became Shah al-Bukhari. It's a little bit Mamluk and Islamic. Do you think, of course, it was built after Salman?
Yes.
It was a reflection of this melange of mixed of Islamic and European, and they made the same thing but in another way. Do you think so?
I never thought of this before, actually, but this is a very interesting remark. Maybe this. Every architect, when he starts working, he just makes this what we call site analysis. When they have to study what the surroundings and what are the styles of the buildings nearby. So maybe this happened, and it is a very interesting building as well. It's a fantastic building. Thank you.
A lot of questions.
Thanks again for your time today. Just a couple of questions, maybe just about the background behind this church. So it seems like the idea of it started like way back in the 1830s, maybe or 1840s, and maybe Alexandria was a very small town at the time. Just wondering what's the importance of building a bunch of like very prominent churches by, let's say, some of these foreign consuls. What were they trying to achieve by like asking permission from the Pasha himself to allocate land and build such a prominent church when Alexandria was like much smaller in scale compared to Cairo? Was it maybe like building such a church in Cairo would be like too controversial? And the second thing, maybe some of the Anglican churches in Egypt overall are a bit more experimental, let's say, in their designs. Do we see that in other communities, like let's say the Catholic or Armenian churches, or do they just follow the traditional form? They don't adopt it, or they don't kind of play around with that much?
Thank you very much for the questions. For the first question, Alexandria, of course, was a part of the Ottoman Empire, and Bab al-Ali, or the High Fort, was very much resisting building for different other religions. So it was really problematic, and it has to be. We still have this even laws till very soon. There is this what they call Khat al-Hamayuni, or the laws of constructing churches is still very soon, or very limited and very strict. So yeah, of course it wasn't that easy. Afterwards, maybe during Khalif Said time, things were, after the 1840s, even things got much easier. because we, after the London Treaty, Muhammad Ali and his family were much more, became more independent from the Ottoman Empire, so things became much less stricter, yeah. And but of course, with Said came again, and with the changes in the Ottoman Empire itself, with different new laws of what we call it, Tanzimat or something like that, I guess. So things became easier and easier later on. But at that time, it wasn't that easy at all. And for the Cairo church, it's called the Old Saints, right? The Old Saints is a very interesting building with this flower-shaped church, and it is a replacement of another church that was unfortunately demolished in the 1970s when they built the 6th of October bridge. So they had to demolish it, but it was a very interesting building. And they built the new one in, I guess, in the 1980s, and it reminds me of another projects of other Latin American architects with this experimental form. Speaking about minorities or the communities of Alexandria, there were lots of communities, and they all wanted to reflect their identity in built forms. So the Armenians, when they built Armenian churches, they wanted to reflect their Armenian identity. So they made purely Armenian churches, and so on. Maybe the Armenians are the most important, the most strict or the most traditional ones. But I guess, in my point of view, in my opinion, this very bold and experimental example is unique. In my point of view, I'm not sure if someone can remind us of something else. But this is my first thoughts on this. Thank you.
Professor, thank you for an amazing talk. Just an observation, really, your thoughts on the sort of British arrogance, talking about the repudiation of Northern Gothic, when my understanding is Gothic would not have existed at all were it not for the meeting of West and East and the inspiration that the West drew for the creation of the Gothic, particularly through the experience of what we would loosely call the Crusades. It's an interesting irony.
Thank you. Thank you.
So maybe time for one last question.
Thank you so much for this very informative lecture. I'm just got a little bit confused. Does James Wilde is an architect or not? And if so, why they assigned this project to him? As long as we talked about, he was very interested in Islamic and Arabic ornamentation. So why he was building a church? Thank you.
Yes, he definitely was an architect, and we saw his earlier project. Maybe they chose him because he has an earlier church built back in England. And I don't think there's a contradiction or a problem with his interest in Islamic or in ornaments. From what briefly we browsed his drawings and his sketchbooks, he was not just interested in the ornaments themselves, but he was also interested in the structures, in the lighting. He drew lots of cross-sections in buildings, in residential houses in Old Cairo. So it's not only about the ornaments. Maybe I was just referring to the drawings that are more relevant to our case, which ornaments were more important in this case. But of course he's an architect, and he learned a lot, and he tried to reflect what he learned in Cairo on this very special design.
Very last question.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor, for this amazing lecture. My quick question is, are there any churches maybe in Alexandria or even all over Egypt, that had got the same idea and had been influenced by Islamic architecture?
Maybe. Yeah, yes, exactly. The point is, when it was built, who was influenced by who, and this is a big question. Yeah, this is very important to understand because, although it's history. History is myself. I love to look at history as the long history, as not as separate phases and separate. And what we call now Islamic ornaments are, in a way or other, is rooted in the Egyptian architecture and Egyptian arts during the Coptic and even earlier and earlier and earlier. So it's a long story, and but to talk about recent 19th century or 20th centuries churches that are influenced by the Coptic Museum. It's a museum. Murkus Samika Basha, he decided to have a replica from the Mosque of Aqmar, the Fatimid Mosque, exactly a replica of the mosque as a facade for the Coptic Museum. And this is also a very big debate and very big question. But I'm not, to answer your question, I cannot remember. Maybe we can think together. Maybe there are other examples. Ramses Musa Wassef, of course, was aware of the great Islamic heritage when he was designing churches, but he never copied ornaments or something like that. So yeah, this needs to be thoroughly studied to be answered. Yeah, thank you, Dr.
So that leaves room for another conference, which will be held here in Alexandria. As it was said, we couldn't start better this conference. Thanks again, Mohamed, for this really, really nice conference, really informative. And I would like to give a round of applause for Mohamed.